Number 10, Jack the Ripper. Starting off number 10 with one of the most infamous murderers in history, Jack. Jack the Ripper plagued the minds of investigators for centuries, actually. He committed 5 gruesome murders in 1888 in and around London's Whitechapel area. He taunted police with mysterious letters and has been the hot topic of news stories for over 120 years. Some believe he was part of a conspiracy to do with Queen Victoria, others that he was just simply an insane man. Part of the reason he was so terrifying is that beyond the regular murders, it was more sociopathic and hateful than anyone could understand at the time. I mentioned in a video a while back that they may have solved who the murderer was in 2019. DNA evidence found on the silk scarf of Catherine Eddowes, Jack's 4th victim, identified Polish barber Aaron Kosminski as Gentleman Jack. Splattered blood and semen were found on the shawl, and the DNA was matched to a descendant of Kosminski. Though some scientists still say the evidence is insufficient to officially declare Kosminski as the infamous murderer, that was the closest authorities ever got to catching him. Number 9, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy put a face to the killer clown. I can't even begin to imagine the horror of discovering what was the real John Wayne Gacy. He was a father, a husband with a very dark secret. The first time he was arrested was in 1968 for committing heinous assault on 2 teenage boys, but was released after 18 months for good behavior. Regardless of his past, Gacy adopted the persona of Pogo the Clown, delighting his community with entertainment. Everyone loved him, and families trusted him, but somehow Gacy got away with destroying the lives of family after family, brutalizing 33 boys, hiding the bodies in his very home. He received the death penalty in 1994, but the fact that he left jail in the first place just goes to show the issues with the criminal justice system around that time. Number 8, Robert Pickton. Presumably, if you're watching this video, you're a true crime fan, and you've probably watched the episode of Criminal Minds. I think it's Criminal Minds, is it? Let me know. Inspired by Pickton. For anyone who thinks Canadians are always nice, not true. Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton owned a pig farm, which he used to his sick advantage. Police initially began a search on his property when they heard about illegal firearms, but soon they began to discover discarded items from women who had gone missing. For instance, an inhaler, an old shoe, and a few more pieces that led to one of the most horrifying murder cases in history. Pickton confessed to the murder of 49 women and said he wanted to make it an even 50 but got sloppy and therefore was caught. Many of the remains were not found due to the fact that he presumably fed the remains to his pigs and even ground up and added the meat to ground pork, which he distributed to family and friends. Anthropologists brought in 2 massive conveyor belts to help sift through dirt in order to find any evidence of the missing women. Pickton was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, which is the most severe sentence in the Canadian judicial system. Number 7, Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was a Soviet serial killer who developed an addiction to killing, stating that stabbing women was the only way he could, get ready, receive sexual satisfaction. Like most terrifying serial killers, he was just like everyone else. Andrei worked as a trusted school teacher, all while committing over 50 murders of young people before he was caught. He was able to get away with it for so long due to the USSR covering up potential serial murders, as murder was not supposed to exist under Stalin. At the time of his birth, Stalin's agricultural policies caused widespread hardship and famine. His early childhood was affected by this, and not only that, Andrei was believed to have suffered from water on the brain at birth, causing him to get frequent UTIs and often wet his bed. He was often the subject of bullying due to the fact that his father was captured during World War II and was ridiculed for his cowardice. Though we can be sympathetic towards his childhood upbringing, we cannot be towards his crimes. He was a truly awful man, and Andrei was arrested in the 1990s and sentenced to death. Number 6, the Green River Killer. Like Pickton, Gary Ridgway was convicted of 49 murders, however, those are only the confirmed cases. Evidence suggests that the number is over 75. The Green River Killer is one of America's most prolific killers because of that reason. During the 1980s to 1990s, women were warned to stay away from Route 99, South King County, Washington, but still, the stretch was often occupied by runaways and prostitutes, and those that didn't pay attention to the warnings often paid the price. He is one of the reasons parents tell their children not to help someone who's looking for their lost dog or have candy in their truck. Gary would lure women by showing them a picture of his son before strangling them in his home and then moving them towards a forest location. Though Ridgway claimed to be a religious man, he had a weak spot for women of the night. Sadly, some of his victims have still never been found, though authorities have uncovered some since his trial. Number 5, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez earned the name Monster of the Andes, though it's in no way a title to celebrate. His early life in Colombia was rife with homelessness, violence of many kinds, and was incarcerated in his early adult life. But he should have never been let go. His crimes spanned across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Pedro was convicted of killing 110 young women, though the estimate is over 300. It seems that Pedro's crimes could have ceased a lot sooner than they did. In the 1970s, he was caught by the Ayacucho community when he attempted to kidnap a young girl. They were going to submit him to tribal law and bury him alive until a Western missionary convinced them that he should be handed over to the Peruvian police. He was then deported back to Colombia, where his crimes began again. He continued to kill, many families resorting to hunting him down themselves, and he was finally caught once again by Carolina Ramon and her peers when he tried to lure her daughter away during the market. Lopez was incarcerated in 1981 for just 16 years after being diagnosed as a sociopath, and then he was released, and his whereabouts are unknown today. Good job, guys. Number 4, Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer. True crime doc fans know this name very well. He is another man who, like Jack the Ripper, loved the notoriety of his crimes. The BTK killed at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991, baffling the police in Wichita, Kansas. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill, which sadly describes the pattern of his crimes. At night, he may have been a murderer, but during the day, like others on this list, Rader was a devoted family and businessman. After killing his last victim in 1991, Rader went off the map, baffling police even more, making them think he had disappeared. But then, in 2004, around the anniversary of the Otero family, he resurfaced, sending more clues to police, literally handing them proof on a floppy disk that led them to his church. It still wasn't until 2005 he was finally arrested and given 10 life sentences to be served in El Dorado Correctional Facility, and he's still there. Stay there, buddy. Number 3, Richard Trenton Chase, also known as the Vampire Killer of Sacramento, and you can already start to guess why. Chase claims 6 known victims during his life of crime and was a devoted cannibal. He was infamous for drinking the blood of his victims, even mixing it with Coca-Cola at times. Ugh! The signs of what was to come were abundant in his early childhood. He would often wet the bed and delight in drinking the blood of small animals, and every true crime fan knows what comes next. He was in and out of mental institutions most of his life and developed hypochondria from his addiction to hard drugs and alcohol. He was convinced that someone had stolen his main arteries and that his blood was turning into powder. He continued to hunt animals, consuming them raw, and once he was found in a field covered in cow's blood. But of course, he graduated to bigger game, and I can't even say what he did to the victims. It was gruesome, guys. Awful. The police eventually got a lead when a girl he went to high school with ran into him, noticing his sunken appearance and blood on his shirt. He was finally caught and tried to plead insanity. The court denied the claim, which I honestly find is weird because he obviously was insane. But Chase was found dead in his cell from an OD on medication he was given while in prison. Honestly, good riddance, man. Number 2, Delphine LaLaurie. Comment down below if you're a fan of American Horror Story. That show is built on shock factor, but man, there were episodes in Coven about Delphine LaLaurie that I actually couldn't stomach. I don't even think I can finish it yet. This woman was vile, to say the least. On April 10th, 1834, a fire at the LaLaurie mansion broke out in New Orleans, leading to a stomach-churning discovery. Rescuers found a 70-year-old black woman chained to the stove while LaLaurie was trying to save the furniture. She was the one who set fire to the house in order to escape the torture Delphine inflicted on her and others in the house. She led them to the attic, and what authorities found was a kind of medieval evil they had no idea hid behind one of the wealthiest women in town. 7 slaves were tied with spiked iron collars. LaLaurie had been accused of the mistreatment of slaves before when she chased a young girl off a balcony. She was forced to sell her slaves but snuck them back in when she made her family buy them so she could keep them. After the torture chamber was discovered, a town mob gathered around the house protesting that something happened had to be done about the devil woman, but she never faced any real punishment for her crimes, only death by reputation. She was ruined in society. Boo-hoo. That's honestly one thing about American Horror Story's Coven season that was satisfying, that for one moment, we got to imagine that she did get her comeuppance. Number 1, Alfredo Bally Trevino. Last but not least, we have the man that actually inspired the character of Hannibal Lecter, Alfredo Bally Trevino. For years, people believed that Hannibal Lecter wasn't based on any real monster. They had theories, but they weren't sure. Thank goodness though, but then Thomas Harris finally revealed in 2013 that this was actually not the case. Trevino was a doctor in Mexico who was awaiting a death sentence in prison for murdering and then chopping up his gay lover. Harris became acquainted with Dr. Trevino in the 1960s while working for an American pulp fiction magazine. He was tasked with interviewing another prisoner named Dykes Askew Simmons. Simmons had tried to escape prison and was shot by a guard in his attempt. Trevino performed life-saving emergency surgery on him, and when Harris heard the story, man, he needed to know more about this guy. After a fight, Trevino sedated his partner, slit his throat in a bath, and then methodically chopped up his body. He drove to a neighbor's farm to bury the evidence in a box, but when workers noticed a suspicious grave the next day, an investigation sparked, leading to his arrest. Harris was struck by the man's grace, which reminds us of a certain fictional charismatic murderer. Remarkably, Trevino was released and continued his medical practice, saving lives of the poor until he died. So, I don't know, I guess some good came from evil, but it still inspired one of literature's most terrifying villains, so what do you think, guys?
Number 10. H.H. Holmes. I've talked about H.H. Holmes before on this channel. Can you guess which video it is in the comments? Let me know. But some of you requested that he be in part 2, and considering his likeness to Hannibal, I completely agree that he has to be. Like the fictional killer, Holmes was handsome, charming, and could woo any woman who met his eye. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, again, no relation to Sherlock Holmes, though he changed his name out of admiration. You know, he should have said Lecter, because he's so close to him. Anyways, like Hannibal and Sherlock Holmes for that matter though, he was a genius. He finished school at the age of 16 and earned his doctorate in medicine by the age of 23. In fact, as a child, he showed an interest in medicine by practicing surgery on animals, and we all know what happens after that. Additionally, in medical school, he got into the habit of stealing corpses and conning insurance claims. Yeah, cool guy. But he isn't famous for any medical marvels, oh no. By the late 1800s in Chicago, Holmes eventually earned enough money to construct a massive labyrinth within a hotel of sorts. It had stores on the bottom and apartments above, each level booby-trapped with trap doors, disorienting mazes, and chutes that would drop victims into the basement where vats of acid, very Joker-like, which was used for decaying corpses, and a crematorium lay where he would, you know, get rid of the evidence. Holmes' House of Horrors would soon be infamously known as the Castle. Like his old medical school days, he also took out insurance policies on his victims to fund his macabre endeavors. Historians still debate how many people he killed exactly, but currently it sits around 200. Number 9, the killer actor. Though many of us carry some heavy torches for actors we've seen on TV, now imagine that actor used their talents for evil, not entertainment. Ramiro Artieda was a Bolivian sex criminal responsible for the deaths of over 8 women between 1937 and 1939. In traditional serial killer fashion, all of them had an uncanny resemblance to each other. The reason he's called the killer actor is due to the fact that he used the acting training he received while studying drama in the US to lure his victims. He created characters and drew women to secluded areas where he would perform his crimes. He played a monk, a film producer, and a professor. Before he left for the States, however, he was also accused of killing his younger brother, Luis, when his family estate passed solely to him, and his fiancée left him due to the allegations, so he was a bit heartbroken. So when he returned from Bolivia, his goal was to eradicate anyone who looked anything like his ex-fiancée. Rough. Thankfully, his crimes were cut short, and he was sentenced to death in July 1939. Number 8, William Devon Howell. Some people have cool names for their cars, like the Batmobile or Knight Rider. Howell thought it'd be cool to name his 1985 Ford Econoline the mobile, and that just about says it all right there. William was already in jail for the murder of Nilsa Arizmendia after she was last seen getting into his van in 2003. Blood was found in his mobile, but she wasn't the only one of his victims. Police discovered 3 bodies on a desolate stretch of land in 2007, all linked to Howell. But his body count rose in 2015 when 4 more bodies were discovered behind a Connecticut strip mall on the same stretch of land where they found the 3 others. Police linked them to Howell after hearing his confession to another cellmate about his garden, which is where he buried his victims. He was also notorious for sleeping next to his victims while they decomposed in his car. Though he doesn't sound anywhere close to a genius like the infamous Hannibal, there's something so disturbing about these lonely murders committed by a drifter in Connecticut. What was it about him that made these women trust him enough to follow him into his car? Number 7, the Great Blood Sorceress. First off, why do we give such epic names to murders like Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer? Like, what? Now the Great Blood Sorceress? Like, damn. It seems like we're celebrating these people, but we're not. I don't know. Hi, my name is Rachel Fisher and welcome to my existential crisis. Anyways, Magdalena Solis, aka the Great Blood Sorceress, was a religious fanatic turned serial killer who plagued the minds and bodies of Mexico. She joined the Santos and Cayetano Hernandez cult in 1963 and started having warped visions of grandeur and a marked sexual perversion, which led her to do a lot of stuff I can't say out loud because YouTube gets mad. With the cult, they moved to Yerba Buena, which had a population of around 50 people, all poor and starving, and convinced them they were gods. While the brothers knew it was fake, Magdalena went hardcore method in her role as the priestess and believed the whole thing. She was responsible for 8 confirmed murders, though possible 15, through sacrifices where the victims were tortured and beaten. Afterwards, she removed their hearts and drank their blood. Followers of her group claimed that she was a reincarnation of an Aztec goddess. Sure, I mean, whatever makes you sleep better at night, man. Number 6, Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a former soldier who was honorably discharged from the US Army in 2011. But little did they know, Keyes was ready to fulfill a plan he had been waiting for years. Once discharged, he turned his cell phone off, flew to Chicago, and then drove a rental to Vermont. He paid cash for all expenses to avoid leading anyone to his pit, just one of the pits he had planted all over the country. He had buried supplies in a specific area back in 2009, and once there, he picked a random couple and meticulously carried out his dark deed. He killed them. His next victim was Samantha Koenig in Alaska in 2012 and delighted in taunting the family with texts and photographs and debit withdrawals, maintaining the illusion that she was still alive. Keyes followed no pattern, killed at random, which made it incredibly difficult to catch him, but eventually he was caught in Texas, confessed to 8 murders, though police suspect there were definitely more. They just can't find them. Though his attacks may appear random, they were heavily thought out and eerily methodical. It's almost as if he planned his own arrest. He is a horror movie killer brought to life. Never mind Hannibal Lecter. Number 5, Vicki Dawn Jackson. Between December 2000 and February 2001, Vicki Dawn Jackson went on a murder spree, killing as many as 20 people and attempting to kill 5 more. But outside her small town, you have never heard of her. Similar to Lecter, Jackie worked in the medical field of sorts as a nurse in the small town in North Texas. The hospital she worked at suddenly underwent a plague of respiratory-related deaths, but since all the patients who died were elderly, well, no one thought anything of it. No one became suspicious until several vials of methacurium chloride, a drug used to temporarily paralyze a patient's ability to breathe, had disappeared. Investigators narrated on Jackson after colleagues recalled that she'd often say she'd take care of unruly patients, then realizing after that Vicki was the last one seen when the patients died, 2 and 2 together. It still took until July 2002 for Jackson to be arrested, even after they found a syringe with traces of the drugs in her garbage. But when she finally went to court, she didn't put up a fuss and admitted to all the crimes. She continues to serve her life sentence, and good riddance. The pain of losing a loved one is hard enough, and the fact that Vicki took so many from their families while in her care is painful to wrap your head around. Number 4, the monster of Ecatepec, Juan Carlos. It's 2018 and a string of murders plague Mexico City. shocking the country. Juan Carlos became known as the Monster of Ecatepec for killing over 20 women in the quiet suburb. But he wasn't alone. His wife Patricia was used as a lure to bring his victims back to their house of horrors. The couple would say that Patricia sold cheap clothes, and that was enough to lure the women in. They didn't discriminate against who they took, even claiming young mothers. The two were caught and arrested when authorities found them pushing around a stroller filled with body parts, not a baby. Carlos has even warned police that should he ever be freed, the first thing he will do is kill again. And I hope they listen to him and don't just go, oh, never mind, we'll just release you. Honestly, one of the most chilling ones, and we're not even at the top 3 yet, so get ready! Speaking of which, if you like this list, you know what to do and let us know. Number 3, Fred and Rosemary West. I've got to thank commenter Robert Clark for providing some more leads, including these next 2, so 3 and 2. Fred and Rose West are yet another terrible duo, more terrifying than the singular monster that was Hannibal Lecter. Fred and Rose West might have been a charming couple, a delight at parties, but like most of our most charming killers, it was the perfect facade. The Wests and murdered at least 9 young women, including their own daughters between 1973 to 1987. The majority of the murders took place in their very home. To cover up the frequent burials of their victims, Fred would cover it up by constantly doing home improvements and garden work. The victims who weren't a part of their family would be lured to the house under claim that the family was simply looking for nannies. When they were finally caught, Fred committed suicide while waiting in prison, and Rosemary is still living out her sentence in jail, and thank goodness. Ugh. I can't even go into detail because YouTube gets mad, but what they did was just absolutely horrific. Just a combination of everything horrible. Like everything you could imagine, they did. Yeah. Number 2, the Hammersmith nude killer. So thanks also to that commenter. You thought Jack the Ripper was bad? Well, welcome to Hammersmith nude killer. The most terrifying part is that we still don't know who the killer is, just like Jack the Ripper. It was a peaceful morning in London, 1964, when the first body was discovered, washed ashore on the Thames. This would be one of the 6 victims of the Hammersmith nude killer. Nicknamed Jack the Stripper, as all 6 of the victims were petite, young prostitutes murdered and mutilated in a similar fashion to the infamous killer, except all were dumped naked. Their bodies were found in Kensington, Chiswick, Hammersmith, Brentford, and Ealing, and it is supposed that his kill count reaches above the confirmed number. The killer somehow evaded one of the largest manhunts in all of history, including that of Jack the Ripper. The closest the police ever got was when they discovered the exact area where the perp would store the bodies before he released them. But then, just like that, killing stopped. No trace left to follow. Like the OG Ripper case, there was a large range of suspects coming from a wide span of backgrounds, rich and poor, but still to this day, no one has any clue as to who was responsible. Oh, good God. Now, number 1, it's so gross, guys. First off, I want to say thank you to commenter Somwell C for pointing me in the direction of Albert Fish, but it feels weird to say thanks. Albert Fish claimed to have committed at least one murder in every state in the 1930s and 1934. Mrs. Budd's daughter, Grace, had been missing for quite a while when she received an anonymous letter that read, quote, "Dear Mrs. Budd, on Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries, we had lunch, Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her." Unquote. This should give you a very clear idea of the nature of his crimes, because what he said he wanted to do, he in fact did. Albert Fish had many names: the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, and the Brooklyn Vampire. Since Fish spent most of his childhood in an abusive orphanage, Fish grew up associating pleasure with pain. Not only would he commit horrendous sadistic atrocities onto others, he would also commit them onto himself. His addiction to pain knew no limits, but was able to hide his mental illness enough to father 6 children with his wife before she eventually left him when the illness became so apparent she couldn't ignore it. He would regularly mutilate himself with nails, needles, and even light his private areas on fire. This he did to his victims as well, and more. If you ever saw him in the street, you'd never think to look twice. He just looked like a regular guy, which is the most terrifying part. There are so many levels to his crimes, which makes Albert Fish oddly make the number 1 spot. Number 10, Belle Gunness. Originally from Norway, Belle Gunness was a serial killer who plagued Indiana and Illinois with one mysterious death after another. In the 20th century, Belle killed over 40 people, including members of her own family, and potentially faked her own death. She was never caught. She was very tall, around 250 pounds, and had 3 children who all died on April 27, 1908, when her house mysteriously caught on fire. Gunness was presumed dead, but when they started sifting through the wreckage, the townsfolk made a horrific discovery. They found the bodies of her children, though one headless body that didn't align with Belle herself, so where was she? Many townspeople claim that relatives have visited her farm and never returned. Another recalled a hired farmhand named Joe Maxon was often seen covering up large holes near the hog pen. They got to digging and soon 40 bodies were discovered, and that was just at this farm. Upon investigation, it was also discovered that she killed all of her husbands and even their daughters and sons they brought with them in order to gain insurance policies. She would also lure men with ads that read, and I quote, "Personal comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Illinois, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow the answer with a personal visit. Triflers need not apply." Yeah. No surprise when belongings of the men who answered her call were found in the pit. Whew. Vicious. Number 9. Rodney Alcala. There's actually a movie coming out about this with Anna Kendrick playing Cheryl.
Bachelor number 1. You're a dirty old man. Take it.
Oh, come on, over here.
Dating is really hard. It's so hard. It sucks. It sucks. It's the worst. And having out there really doesn't help. You have to text your friends, let them know where you're going. You could meet a guy who says all the right things, ticks all your boxes, but then he turns out to be Rodney Alcala. During the 1970s, Rodney claimed the lives of 9 women of varying ages, though many suspect the number could be as high as 100. He's still confessing to murders to this day. His method was triangulation, but in most cases he would wait for the woman to regain consciousness before he made the final kill. He would also arrange the corpses in poses, taking photos as keepsakes because he was studying film. And he was a photographer. Whoopee. One of the reasons that Alcala is so famous beyond his murders is because of his appearance on the dating show. Cheryl Bradshaw was the bachelorette, and thank goodness she wasn't convinced by his disarming charms. Bradshaw said, quote, "I started to feel ill, he was acting really creepy," unquote. Trust your gut, folks. If it's too good to be true, chances are it is. Number 8. Issei Sagawa. After you hear what this guy did, you will be very shocked to learn that he is free and walking the streets of Japan. In 1981, Sagawa shot and killed his friend Renee Hartfelt, and then he ate her, something he wanted to do for over 32 years. Over a 2-day period, I might add. Like another person we're gonna mention later, he believed that by doing so he could absorb her beauty. Oh, and he also committed, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, you two might get mad at me, but his desires first began upon seeing his classmates' thighs when he was younger and thinking they looked delicious. Eventually that grew into a desire to carry out the ritual of killing a woman, any woman. He did go to a psychiatrist about it, who classified him as highly dangerous, but when his rich father found out, he covered it up and sent him to school in Sorbonne, France, which is where he met Renee. He gained her trust, invited her over for dinner, befriended her, and then, when the time was right, he shot her. He packed up what was left of her corpse into suitcases and took a cab over to a park and dropped them off. But bystanders saw the blood leaking and called the police. He admitted it, flat out, was declared insane, deported back to Japan where he was supposed to stay in a mental institution for the rest of his life, but they declared him sane when he got there, and since the case was dropped in France, he only had to stay for 15 months. He is now free, walks the streets, and says that he still has the same desires, though he wants it to be a Japanese woman, specifically now, so. Number 7. The Love Slave Killers. To say Charlene Williams was intelligent is an understatement. She had an IQ of 160. But she had trouble finding love, as I mentioned, dating sucks, after 2 failed marriages, and that is until she met Gerald Gallego. Together, the two hunted and kidnapped 10 young women who Gerald would sexually torment before they were shot or strangled. They killed across 3 states between 1978 and 1980 until a bystander witnessed an abduction and noted the license plate. Charlene was only sentenced sentenced to 16 years while Gerald was put on death row. Charlene made a plea that she couldn't stop Gerald and that it was all him who killed the women. To this day, she insists that she never agreed to any of his plans and that she even tried to set them free, saying, and I quote, "I would have done anything if I could have stopped him. I know I couldn't have stopped him. I tried to stop him," unquote. So jury is still out as to how involved Charlene was with the crimes, but as she has been released from prison, time will only tell if more bodies turn up. And now she's doing charity work, which is great, I guess. Number 6. Dennis Nilsen. Nilsen was born in Fraserburgh and is one of Britain's most infamous killers. He confessed to killing and dismembering 15 young men and dissected their bodies, though it could have been more. When he was finally caught in 1983, police began to link a series of lucky escapes and incidents over the 5 years prior. Had they took them into more consideration, they might have caught him earlier. Nilsen was never okay with his sexuality and chose to manifest his desires in a murderous way. He would befriend these men at pubs and bars, disarming them with friendly discourse before luring them home. There he would kill them and reportedly sit with their corpse before taking them apart in order to dispose of the body. He flushed a lot of the remains down the toilet, but little did he know that would get him caught. A neighbor called the plumber to unblock the drain outside, and lo and behold, that would have been an awful day at work. Like one of the worst. Talk about dirty jobs. He was sentenced to life in prison but reportedly died in agony after surgery complications in 2018. Number 5. Harold Shipman. Like Hannibal, Shipman was a doctor. Though not in the same field, he had the similar lethal intentions as Lecter. Shipman's mother died when he was only 17 and immediately decided that he wanted to pursue a career in medicine. So he attended the University of Leeds and failed his entrance exam once before his placement. He became addicted to the painkiller pethidine and got caught forging prescriptions. Following rehab, he got hired at the Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, and it was there that he would take the life of over 260 patients. 260. He would lethally inject them with opiate painkillers and nobody thought anything of it. The local undertaker did notice that Shipman's patients were always found sitting or reclined on a couch or sofa, but still, nothing to worry about. But when Angela Woodruff's mother died, leaving behind a will giving everything to Shipman, she knew. Her mother had just been to see Shipman that day, and were it not for Angela, Shipman may have taken many more lives. No one knows why he did. Perhaps he was trying to avenge his mother's death, or maybe he liked playing God. Either way, the Doctor of Death title suits him pretty well, I think. Number 4. Luca Magnotta. This guy, seriously, almost made the top 3, because to this day, his crimes haunt me. If you've ever watched the documentary Don't F with Cats, then you know his name. Or if you lived in Toronto area, you know his name. I watched it having no idea what it was about, and I still can't shake it. I literally cried for days, and I couldn't wrap my head around the things that he'd done and the things that I saw. Warning, the documentary gets pretty graphic, right, Chris? Yes, it does. Scarborough, Ontario native Luca Magnotta started out like most serial killers, killing animals in brutal and public ways. He is a pathological narcissist who would film his graphic crimes and post them on the internet for all to see. First against animals, and then onto bigger game. In May of 2012, he filmed the brutal killing and dismemberment of Chinese Concordia student Jun Lin with an ice pick. He was obsessed with the movie Basic Instinct. Since the first cat video surfaced, internet volunteers had been profiling him online for years and knew what was about to happen before the event itself. He was obsessed with himself, creating fake fan accounts, praising pictures, and editing fake ones with friends. He did everything he could for attention, and the pathway towards his bloody deed is so inhuman. But apparently, he's doing just fine in prison. He even got married recently. Glad you're happy. Number 3. Charles Manson. Yup. You know that name. If you don't, here is why he is on this list. It's one thing to kill someone, or even a bunch of people, but it's a whole other ballgame to convince other people to do it for you. When you Google the word cult, Manson will probably come up front and center. Charles ran a cult in the 1960s known as the Manson family, a group of small but heavily devoted individuals who followed his eccentric religious teachings. His ideas were drawn from science fiction and the occult, and preached that an apocalyptic race war was coming. To bond them together, he ordered them to carry out killings so that they would remain united. Basically, they wouldn't leave because they had something that he could hold over them, I don't know. But the group obeyed, which led to the death of actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, Benedict Canyon, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, Gary Hinman, and Donald Shorty Shea, plus 4 more. Rumor has it the reason he attacked Tate's house was because the music producer who used to live there refused to make a record with Manson. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. If you thought Vlad the Impaler was bad, well, yeah, I mean, he was. But when it comes to bloodlust, I think Elizabeth Bathory takes the cake on this one. She was born on August 7th, 1560 in Hungary in a prominent Protestant noble family. Her uncle Stephen Bathory was king of Poland, and the rest of her family basically controlled all of Transylvania. She was an untouchable nightmare. She married a war hero named Count Ferenc Nadasny, who gifted her an estate and perhaps the skills in which she used to kill and maim. After he died, Elizabeth took over the estate, and suddenly young women went missing. Bathory became obsessed with the idea of immortality and believed that bathing in the blood of virgins was the key. But she did more than that. She would lure girls to the castle, even daughters of other nobility, in the guise of work or education. Before draining them of their blood, she would slice, stab, sew their mouths shut, leave them out in the cold, cover them in honey so bees would sting them, and she would bite off their flesh from their face and other intimate parts. When she was satisfied, her servants drained the blood into a bath. According to her journal, she killed just around 650 women. 650 women. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days. Dracula can take a seat, for she was the stuff of nightmares. Okay, number 1, guys, and I know you're kind of expecting it to be someone, I think maybe, but I'm not gonna do it. Because we already know about him. And his name rhymes with Rudolph. Number 1, Paul Joseph Goebbels. If you know your World War II history, then you know there was an infamous German leader that led one of the largest atrocities in history. YouTube won't let me say his name for some reason, but you know who I'm talking about. Obviously he would be number 1 on this list, but I remember learning about Goebbels thinking, who really did it? He was able to use propaganda to turn an entire country against one group of people. Some would even argue that he was even better at public speaking than Adolf was. He regulated all the media content of Germany and forced all Jewish artists, actors, musicians, directors, magazine editors into unemployment, ensuring anything that went out presented his leader faithfully and also was anti-Semitic. He staged a public burning of books that were considered un-German. Though Adolf was the figurehead we all remember, it is because of Goebbels that an entire anti-Semitic movement led to the lives of 6 million people being lost. He himself was a fanatic, despite at one time being engaged to a Jewish woman, and all his favorite teachers growing up were apparently Jewish. Maybe he never physically got his hands dirty, but he didn't need to. He had enough people to do it for him. If you're somehow not convinced that he should be number 1, then I invite you to picture this. Goebbels was able to convince an entire country to hate, betray, and kill with a few films, speeches, and radio. Imagine what he could have done with social media.